Hello and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest Urban Living webinar. Today we're going to be talking about the student accommodation market. My name's George Sell. I'm Editor-in-Chief at International Hospitality Media. We are an online B2B publisher of news websites for the hospitality sector, and we are also a conference and awards organizer. So today's session is going to last an hour. We're going to have around 45 minutes of Q&A of discussion with our panel. Then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. And we'd like to make the session as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions, please do submit them using the chat function or the Q&A function, and we'll get around to answering as many of them as we can towards the end of the session. There'll be a recording of the session sent via email to everybody who's registered. And if you could all keep yourselves on mute if you're not one of our speakers, then that would be fantastic. So today's session is one of a series in a lead up to an event called the Urban Living Festival. More of that later, but the series has been sponsored by Res Harmonics, and here to tell you a bit about them is Giles Horrich-Smith. Over to you, Giles.
Thanks, George. That's very kind. It's great to be here. I'm Giles from Res Harmonics. We provide a software platform for running innovative living, residential and hybrid model properties, and we cover all areas of running these types of businesses, from online selling to reservations to on-site operations, giving a great guest experience, leasing and finance, all in one platform, so your team members can focus on looking after the guests, saving time across the business and understanding what's working and what's not working. We've really enjoyed sponsoring these series, and actually there's been some fantastic debate and discussions going on, and it's been truly great value as an experience to be involved. And so thank you, George, Katie, Piers and the rest of the team for organising it. We look forward to doing this again in the future, and also toward the Urban Living Festival, and when we all actually get to do this in person. Today's session looks really great, fascinating bunch, and we're just having a brief chat beforehand. So some great speakers. I wish you all the best for a great session, and I'll listen with interest. Thank you.
Thanks, Giles. You can see Giles's contact details in the chat along with the Res Harmonics web address, so please do get in touch with Giles if you'd like to learn more. And today's session is sponsored by CommScope, and Rob Everett is going to tell us a bit about them. Over to you, Rob.
Thank you, George, and welcome everybody. So my name is Rob Everett. I am the Territory Account Manager / MDU Vertical Lead for the UK and Ireland. And we're delighted to be able to sponsor this session today, and especially it's a bit of an interest of me personally. So I've followed this sector for the last 3 years and have just watched Ruckus CommScope grow within this market, and seeing our partners grow with us as well has been an awesome achievement. For people that don't know who CommScope are, you may have seen us in the market as Ruckus Networks. So Ruckus Networks is the networking arm of CommScope, and we are the market leader in wired and wireless solutions across the MDU market, specifically for student accommodation. And I think we've all seen a massive increase in the need and the requirements of networks, especially within student accommodation. And yeah, as I say, it's a great part of our business, and it's something that we lead with in the UK and Ireland on a regular basis. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the session today. Please reach out to me or any of our team if you need any assistance. And George, back over to you.
Thank you, Rob. And as with Giles earlier, Rob's details are in the chat there, so please do get in touch with him. So before we introduce our speakers, I just wanted to show some context slides just to give a bit of background to the discussion. So there's been a lot of new investment into the student accommodation sector. So here you see some quite big names from the investment world moving into the sector. Barings, Crosstree, which is predominantly a hospitality investor, has also made its first move into the PBSA world. Lots more new investment into the space there. Ascott Residents Trust is an interesting one, predominantly in the hospitality space. It's serviced accommodation, and some big names teaming up to go into the European sector too. And the theme of hospitality overlapping with the PBSA sector and indeed other real estate asset classes is continuing apace. And here we've seen developments such as hospitality professionals joining student accommodation providers. We've seen PBSA projects increasingly forming part of mixed use developments. And we've seen the launch of platforms like Housemates, which is essentially an OTA for the student accommodation world. So I'm very pleased to say that we've got a great panel joining us today. So I'm going to ask everybody to introduce themselves. We'll go from left to right on the slide. So if we could kick off with Brian, welcome to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Brian Welsh, as it says there. I'm the head of student at Roundhill Capital. Roundhill are a vertically integrated pan-European developer, owner, operator, and investor in purpose-built student accommodation, and have been involved in the sector since 2012, when they entered by buying a business called Nido Student, which was attached to 3 very large central London properties. Prior to that, I have been behind businesses including the Student Housing Company, Knightsbridge Student Housing, and Liberty Living. So I've been involved in the sector for, well, 16 years next month. So I've seen everything that's come and gone in student accommodation in the UK in that time. And I was also one of the first movers into Spain, France, Ireland, and latterly Netherlands and Germany from the UK. So good rounded understanding of the sector and experience in developing and operating across Europe.
Thanks very much, Brian. Tarek, welcome to you.
Thank you, George. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I'm Tarek. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Southern Grove. Southern Grove is a London-based developer that does all sorts of asset classes. It's not restricted to student. However, the brand name that we run our student accommodation buildings under is Future Generation. It's a joint venture between Southern Grove and Bahraini-based Untitled Capital, which is our joint venture partners, and currently we've got 500 beds in operation, 1,500 beds under construction, opening in actually 2 months or so, and another 1,000 student beds in the pipeline. All UK based at the moment, although we have tried to go into Ireland previously, but at the time it wasn't the right move for us to build on that. So we're very much UK focused, although still considering operations in Europe in the medium term.
Thank you, Tarek. And Rebecca, welcome to you.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here this afternoon. I'm Rebecca. I work at BNP Paribas Real Estate in the research team. My focus is specifically on the bed sectors. So I cover student housing, but I also look at care homes, senior living, build to rent, and the hotel sector. BNP Paribas Real Estate is a consultancy, valuation, advisory, prop management business. We can cover all parts of the property life cycle from all different angles.
Thanks, Rebecca. And finally, Craig, welcome to you.
Thank you, George, and hello, everybody. My name's Craig Bryant, and I recently joined Fresh as the Strategy and Business Development Director. Fresh is a leading residential for rent manager, and we currently have around 20,000 room portfolio spread across PBSA, BTR and co-living. My previous experience was 7 years spent in various roles, commercial and legal, at UPP, PBSA partnership model owner-operator. That was limited to the UK, whereas Fresh is UK and Ireland. So we're going international.
Thanks very much, Craig. You can see the LinkedIn profiles for all our speakers in the chat. So if you'd like to carry on the conversation with them after the session today, then I'd encourage you to do so. So let's kick off by talking about performance and how the sector has negotiated the pandemic so far. We ran a story back in March, which said that UK student accommodation lettings for the 2021-22 academic year were down 5%, which sounds pretty impressive to me when you consider what the world has just gone through. Brian, from your perspective, how are things looking in terms of performance and future demand?
Well, it's been a mixed bag over the last couple of years, hasn't it? I think the observation I would make is that the sector has impressed everyone with its resilience. So understandably, when a lot of students looking at the UK, first of all, a lot of students who felt unable to access their accommodation, universities were closed, a lot of students had gone home to their parental home and were wondering why they were still paying rent, and there were conversations ongoing in that area. And actually a lot of students were given some sort of rent rebate or some sort of discount. Banks and investors were very supportive, and there's a sense of everybody pulling together to get that done. I've always been a proponent of the view that in September 2021, we'll be back to largely business as usual. And across the UK, that has been the case. We're seeing really strong demand for September. University applications and acceptances are up significantly on all of the early stage applications. International student numbers are up in the UK, albeit softened a little bit by a softening in the EU students coming to the UK as a direct result of Brexit. So overall, the resilience has been strong in the UK, and across the continent, we're seeing it has been different in different locations. So as a broad brush, Northern Europe has remained pretty resilient. So in Germany, for example, our portfolio is largely, there's much more blurring of the lines between residential and student. So people are seeing it as their permanent home, and they're making that permanent shift for 51 weeks a year, and therefore where else are they going to go? So they stayed in residence. Netherlands, very, very similar, very robust occupancy figures throughout the pandemic. But in Southern Europe, as you get to Spain and Italy and other more southern destinations, maybe there's been a bit of more of a softening of occupancy in the 2021 academic year. But again, we're seeing much better, stronger interest, stronger applications for the 21-22 academic year starting this September or October, November, depending on which European country you're in. So overall, I think as a sector, we've seen a bit of a blip from a demand perspective. Supply has slowed down as some developments have been affected by the pandemic. And if you look at Ireland, for example, where they've had a solid, you must not work on building sites for 2 months, that's had an inevitable knock-on effect on some programs. However, generally speaking, when you look across at other asset classes, PBSA has been super resilient. So we're really pleased about that. Tumultuous times, like for all of us, but the long-term sustainability of the sector seems unaffected.
So your development pipeline for the medium term, is that pretty much business as usual?
Yes, I'd say it is. In fact, if anything, we're seeing a bit of I don't want to say turbocharging, but we're seeing a significantly increased amount of interest in the sector from people who have huge allocations to real estate, but are finding it really difficult to home that equity in, for example, retail, commercial, and the sort of go-to massive sectors that you would have put your money in the past are ripe for dislocation. So are you going to buy a provincial office for 4.5%, 5% when you could buy a student equivalent for 5.5%, 6%, and maybe in the provinces here, or a development site for something like that? You're probably going to put your money into somewhere which is much more resilient, residential, logistics, the final mile deliveries, these sort of data centers. So seeing an increase in attractiveness and therefore an increase in value of these assets, these asset classes, and student as a subset of residential is definitely seeing that.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks, Brian. We'll move more on to investment shortly, but Tarek, does Brian's experience of the UK market tally with how your businesses are performing?
Yeah, spot on. I mean, it's definitely been an interesting year or year and a half now. Time flies since this whole kind of shift started. And just looking back, I guess in terms of how we tried to deal with it, one of the first challenges was initially the fact that actually we have a lot of international students in our buildings. So as Brian said, there's a lot of people who actually had to stay there because they couldn't go back. And then it was also from an operational perspective, it was about making sure that they're feeling comfortable, safe, and so on. But then equally as well, we had to be really flexible on the financial side. So we dealt with things on a case-by-case basis. Our banks were very supportive. But at the same time, we felt the pressure a little bit because, we couldn't do a Unite, for example, and just kind of, go with a massive headline and write off, because we're not as big, so we couldn't do that. And there was a bit of a challenge trying to kind of work through all of that. For this year, for 2021 now, we're going into the new term. We are actually, on our existing assets, are performing really, really well. So that again reaffirms the resilience of the market. So we're sold out in one of our locations in Colchester already, and we're about 80% let in another location, a tough market, really tough market, which is Sheffield. Obviously, the rest of our portfolio is being leased up whilst under construction. So it's a little bit slower, but you'd expect that. But even taking these into consideration, overall, we're 50% let for the start of the academic year, which is broadly in line with where we envisage things to be at the moment. Some of our locations are big clearing universities, so we're expecting a big jump in the next few months, or hoping for one. But we certainly expect to be, probably high 80s, low 90s come September.
Great, thanks, Tarek. We touched on investment into the space there, and the slides that I showed earlier had some quite interesting new entrants into the sector in terms of investment. Rebecca, what do you think is the kind of current landscape for investment into the sector? Is it becoming seen, as Brian said, like a more attractive asset class and one that more people are looking to deploy into?
Yeah, I think so. I think over the last 18 months, the sector's really kind of been stress tested, and it's been pushed to its limits, I'd say, in some respects. And it's kind of really proved itself. Yields have actually remained very stable. The sector kind of worked together to navigate through the period. And that, the income stability is what is so attractive to investors. And I think it's shown that it can do that even in a really difficult period. And I think we touched on it just earlier, the fact that there are less opportunities perhaps in some of the other traditional real estate sectors for investors, and they have cash to deploy. So they are looking for, the yield, the income stability, and that is on offer in the student housing sector. The last few months, since the start of the year, I think we probably say that the market's been fairly quiet in terms of investment. There have been some large portfolio transactions, which I'm sure the panelists are aware of, but there hasn't been a huge amount of kind of standing stock individual transactions. And we think that there's still some hesitancy in the market, but when there's more clarity on bed occupancy in September, October time, we think that things are really going to pick up in the sector, and that there's a lot of pent-up demand from investors, global investors, for UK student housing.
Mm-hmm. And where do you think the sector is in terms of consolidation? Do you think we're likely to see much in the way of M&A activity over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there will be new entrants to the sector, but I think they'll be looking at how to get some scale in the sector as well. So I do think that will happen over the coming years. The demand characteristics in the sector and the fundamentals of the sector are incredibly strong. So it is an increasingly attractive proposition for investors looking, a few years down the line.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. So Brian, you guys are a pan-European operator and developer. Is that model going to become the norm, or are you quite unusual in that respect?
I think we are quite unusual. So, we are, as Roundhill, we are primarily a residential and logistics investor with an interest in prop tech. So, and the portions of the business kind of weigh 80% towards residential. So we have been large private residential landlords in multiple European jurisdictions, and that means we have a large footprint of offices across Europe. We have 12 offices across Europe, full of property professionals who are acquiring residences across Europe all of the time. So we're developing in different asset classes in those jurisdictions. So if I look at Madrid, we have half a dozen guys in an office in Madrid doing residential development. So for us to expand our student accommodation footprint to Madrid, it's actually relatively straightforward. So the team on the ground are in a position to buy the sites in Madrid, to appoint lawyers, professionals, to perform SIs, and do all of the stuff that is common to all asset classes in real estate investment. And we can overlay that with the student expertise that comes out of the London office and a few local recruits. So we have an infrastructure which makes us quite unique, and our experience in development, we have a very comprehensive development control process, and we see ourselves very much as a blue chip developer in any jurisdiction in which we choose to develop or forward fund or forward purchase assets. So it takes a long time. The business has been doing this for 20 years to have this level of reach. So it's as easy for us to take down assets or development sites in Germany as it is in the Netherlands or Spain. So I think we are quite unique in that. Others like the model, because if you are going to develop and hold an asset, you can maybe generate yourself an additional 200 basis points of return. That's super popular. And I've been involved in developing, I think, in excess of 30,000 beds across Europe, and the vast majority of them to time and the budget. So we have a structure whereby we can develop in a very risk mitigated way. So traditional sources of capital who might have been skittish about developments can access developments in that way. And also because we work with multiple different capital partners on multiple different strategies, that means we can fund different products in different ways. We're not tied to a particular jurisdiction or a particular strategy. If we like the deal, if it fits in our wheelhouse, if we think we can deliver it effectively, responsibly, we believe the underwriting, then we can find a way to get the project funded. And that makes us quite unique. I think there are more people out there who are potentially less opportunistic and can only acquire existing standing stock, for example, and we can do that, but we can also do the nitty-gritty development asset management work as well. So it's a reasonably unique skill set that we have at Roundhill, which sets us slightly apart from others.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Let's move on to the physical product and the operations of it. Craig, do you think anything has changed in terms of what students expect as a result of the pandemics, both in terms of physical spaces and amenities and in the services that you provide?
I think the answer to that is undoubtedly. I mean, in some ways, I think the pandemic has actually reinforced traditional benefits of PBSA, operators providing basics such as safe, secure, good condition, clean environments. And I think a few years ago that might have been enough by itself, but now clearly students are demanding so much more. I think, like the rest of society, the pandemic has very clearly identified that there's a now need for people to be able to work from home or work outside the office. And I think in student language, that's study outside of a faculty or their bedroom in order to create a better well-being environment. The separation between study and work that a lot of us have struggled with. So how does that get built into existing buildings? Obviously, that's slightly more difficult in some ways, but I think going forwards, design-wise, flexible amenity space will become even more key than it has been to date. However, it's been difficult in some of the lockdown periods to make use or full use of that amenity space because of the lockdown parameters. So I think we need to juggle the conflicting almost parameters of creating more amenity space, but also ensuring that within that, actually people have the ability to work quietly, to study, to combine different uses in the same overall space. I think also, certainly we've seen in our facilities that outside space has been very, very popular. That has been, again, because of the lockdown requirements, it's been easier to use the outside space to provide that sort of sense of community that we pride ourselves on in this sector. And I think that has really been beneficial during lockdown to those students that have been, effectively restricted to the campus. So I think outside space, the dining facility has been particularly popular as well. So I think, we've got used to, haven't we, in PBSA, of having gyms, games rooms, cinema rooms, all the things that just a few years ago were seen as luxuries are now seen as necessities. Super fast Wi-Fi, obviously, as well. But I think, this concentration of flexible amenity space, including much better use of outside space, to enable that sense of community to continue even during the sort of harsh periods of lockdown. And I think lessons in lockdown will be taken forward going to the future. I don't think we will suddenly revert to the position we were in a couple of years ago. I don't think students will necessarily want to go back to that sort of way of living. So you do have to be more flexible generally. And then, of course, you've got well-being and ESG, which is increasingly on the agenda of everyone, but including students. Students do care passionately about the environment. They want to see, renewable energy supplies. They want to see sustainable practices such as rubbish collection, recycling, etc. I think the pandemic has also brought forwards, and I'm sure we'll talk about it later, probably the paperless systems. We've gone further down that curve than perhaps people were at the beginning of pandemic, ready to take on board. So we've got this sort of cradle to grave electronic process now, right from marketing right the way through to checkout and everything in between. And I think all of that builds into delivering a service and a product that students buy into from an ESG perspective, and at the same time promotes well-being.
Thanks, Craig. Do you think students are deciding on which accommodation they choose according to the sustainability credentials or the ESG credentials? Has it got to that stage?
I think it's certainly a factor. I'm not sure it's necessarily the defining factor right at this moment in time. And I think this year, building on some of the answers from the panelists earlier on, I think this year there does still remain a concern that I'm seeing in terms of students signing up because they don't know the content of the university course still. I think that's something that really has to be sorted out as soon as possible, to the extent that we're going to have face-to-face teaching, etc., in certain academic institutions. And I think once you've got past that and it's clear, then I think there's going to be a logistics problem in terms of certainly foreign students, the visas, the flights, etc. So we're definitely seeing an uptake in demand for institutions that are making moves to address that. For instance, agreeing to pay the £1,800 quarantine fee or chartering planes, things like that. So I think at the moment, this year in particular, there will be other factors that probably take preeminence in a student's mind as to where they study. And where then for they need accommodation. But I think going forwards, it is an increasingly important aspect of the students' experience.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Craig. Tarek, Craig mentioned there that amenities which 2 or 3 years ago would have been regarded as luxuries are now a given. Is that something that you're finding in your new developments?
Yeah, yes and no. To be honest with you, I think I understand. Yeah, yes, on a tick box basis, they are a given. But what we're finding is, there is a gym and then there's a gym. There is a study room and then there's, and so you can have that list on the website and tick, 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 tick. And that used to be fine, probably in the previous generation of PBSAs. But I think we're getting to the point now where really the level of quality of what is being provided needs to be up to scratch. And that's something that we've spent a lot of time on in the last year and a half. In a way, it was beneficial when we had that little bit of downtime because we had that time to reflect and say, and we were lucky that we had 3 projects under construction, but the amenities were still a bit of a blank canvas. So we started, playing around with things. And one of the things that we realized quite quickly is people are getting really into fitness, wellness, and so, yeah, when I stayed in student accommodation 10 years ago, 12 years ago, the gym consisted of, 1 treadmill and one of those bike things that, but they said there was a gym. And so, people never used it. So we, for example, now have partnered up with an actual fitness kind of personality, Matt Morsia of YouTube fame, and we're doing a branded gym with proper equipment, like the kind of thing that you would get in a gym box or a gym shark or this kind of thing. Because if you want to say that you're providing a gym, then I guess it needs to be a proper gym. It also plays to the fact that, we all spent more time at home in the last year and a half. And me personally, I became a lot more interested in the quality of the place I live in because I was spending more time in it. I suddenly started realizing that my kitchen is not the best layout, or you know, there's not, or there is too much natural light, or this and that. So just just due to the fact that people are going to be spending more time in their living spaces, you know, their expectations of the quality of the stuff that are being provided are going to be higher. You know, it's not just a place where they're going to go sleep and then go to lectures all day anymore, because, you know, now it's a community. You're joining a community of like-minded people. Odds are, even if things go back to normal, inverted commas, you know, there's going to be a hybrid teaching approach, right? And a lot of the stuff that can be taught online will be taught online, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to be willing to travel, join a community, make friends, have fun, learn. Actually, that's going to release more of your time to live in the PBSA. So, you know, it applied, it really tested us, because we feel like we had to be at the, you know, at the top of the game, because that's what the expectation level is. But the gym was just one example. What some of the other stuff that we've done is air conditioning. So we already used to provide air conditioning in our rooms, and we've now just gone that extra level to make sure that every room has its own fresh air supply, so it doesn't mix with the air from other rooms, and it's all filtered, you know, so it deals with all the bacteria and stuff like that. Same with the cinema. You know, cinema, is it a room with a, you know, painted black with a 60-inch TV, or is it an actual cinematic experience with a proper seating, with a screen, with a list of movies, you know, with the popcorn? You know, it's those little things that make a difference, right? And it's almost like it's more mature. It's you know, it's the sort of amenities that you'd expect to see from a, you know, a build to rent, and you know, at this level, of course, the price does reflect that, but you know, you're not buying simply, again, you're not buying a 3/4 bed to sleep on. You're buying, you know, a lifestyle and an experience.
Yeah. Thank you, Tarek. Brian, providing more facilities and more amenities, and also catering to the wellness of the students, presumably means that new developments are becoming more labour intensive and have higher numbers of staff. Is that the case?
Well, there are two things there. If you look at the commercial viability of a PBSA project coming out of the ground, so there's the capital costs associated with developing the residence, and those costs are going up. So if we start off in the UK, we're seeing increasing labour costs, we're seeing lack of clarity on inbound material costs, and all of these things are driving up the costs of developing a PBSA block somewhere in the UK. Overlaying that with additional amenity requirements, whereby you may be giving up square footage for more common space, and that common space, to Tarek's point, and a lot of people are running down that road, ourselves included, saying let's have a better gym, let's have a B&O sound system instead of a whatever. Let's invest more heavily in those common areas, because they are being used more, and they're more of a USP for your residents. So suddenly, if I look at a residence we have in Glasgow, we have a huge amount of common space per person, and we have a music room, we have a games room with PlayStations, you have a great home cinema room, you have a massive gym, you have ping pong tables and pool tables and all of these things, and they all do, the costs of them do add up, and the rents don't go up quickly enough necessarily to offset the additional investment you're putting into these things. So for sure, students' demands have increased. There's been something of an amenities arms race, which we've all been guilty of, and it started off 15 years ago with who can have the fastest internet, and now everybody's got super fast internet. It's how do you find the actual extra points of differentiation. Tarek and the guys at Future Generation have been really creative and coming out with some great new ideas, which is really interesting. The sponsored gyms and such like is great. Branded gyms, we know from experience in the US that students respond really well to a branded offering, and would like to see a Starbucks station rather than a generic coffee station, for example. We're seeing things like that, and those learnings from around the globe are increasingly circling and becoming more of a factor in especially more competitive markets. However, it does go to squeeze margins from developers and overall profitability of product, because whilst you're doing these things, they are largely defensive rather than offensive, by which I mean they are largely to sustain occupancy and to remain competitive in a micro market, than necessarily driving additional revenue from a residence. So we're not really seeing, some people pay more for quality, but what is quality to an individual? It's offering square footage, it's aligning themselves to an ethical company, and Craig alluded to this before in the ESG points. it's the combination of the whole package, but it's very difficult to overcome location and frankly the first impression when you walk in. So if I walk into one of Tarek's residences and Tarek's behind the reception desk and he's super friendly and he makes me feel welcome and at home, that's worth, for me, is worth a slightly better gym or a slightly bigger room. It's the feeling that you get when you walk through the door. And it's great that as a sector, we've driven the hospitality mindset, and my background is hotels, leisure, health clubs, and I've been very involved, like Tarek, bringing those that mindset, that customer service approach to purpose-built student accommodation to help these young people have a great start, great experience when they're living there, and a great start in life. So long way of saying the amenities are super important, becoming more important over time because people will choose on, hey, there's a gym, and again, having run health clubs, some of the best members are the ones that never turn up because they like the idea of going to the gym, but they don't dirty machines. So they pay their rent it's a larger extrapolation of what they're doing in student, right? I'm going to stay there because there's a gym. That's great. That's a box check. That's a very small proportion compared with the ones who join health clubs and actually pay their rent every month and never go. So it's a variation on a theme. People like the idea there's a gym there, but they don't always go and take advantage of that. Although more are than used to in the past.
Perhaps another parallel with the hospitality sector is the increasing use of specialist third-party suppliers for some of these offers. So we've talked about gyms. Do you think perhaps there'll be an increasing trend for third-party suppliers to come in and provide F&B or yoga or various other things? So you kind of run the entire building, but you leave certain aspects of it to experts in those particular fields.
Well, it's funny, we already do that in large part. So the internet service, for example, I've lost count of the number of people who've come to me and said, we will install your internet system and then your caretaker is going to take care of it. And we said, no, thank you very much. That's most definitely in the far too complicated box for an operator to do. And I've run a chain of residences in Spain. And when I started doing that, the last thing I wanted, and they offer catering, but certainly the last thing I want to spend my time doing is recruiting Spanish chefs and waitresses and buying plates and cups and everything else. So there are organizations who do that. And it's really straightforward to enter into an arrangement with those guys where they'll even white label their activities underneath your brand. So you can still have the Nido catering offering, but you can choose underneath that what that means. So we say we want a 4-star offering, we agree a service specification with a provider, we agree a price, and then they take care of it and take care of it all, and it just happens. So will we see more of that? I've no reason to think we wouldn't. And it goes right the way through there, doesn't it? So I might feel really confident about designing a gym, but my experience in gyms might have been 10 years ago, whereas there are people out there living it every day. And Tarek, again, use that example, bringing in a YouTuber, which is something that most people in their 40s wouldn't have really considered, to help design the gym, because people today work out like this and they don't just sit on a bench press or whatever it was that they did in the past. So I can definitely see more of that. So we have, we've leveraged increasingly sophisticated interior designers over time to try and make our rooms and our common areas and even the bedrooms themselves much more aesthetically appealing. But in some respects, you've got more scope in the common areas, because if you make a small change to a bedroom and it's a 695 bedroom residence, if you spend an extra £10 per room, suddenly everything is multiplied by 695. If you decide on the B&O speakers instead of the Samsung speakers in your reception area, it's 2 times 1,000 instead of 695 times. So in many respects, you can have the wow factor in the common areas for far less effect on your bottom line than in the rooms.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Tarek, before we move on to talk about technology, we've got a question in from Vincent Juin, who has asked, what are the craziest requests you've had in terms of amenities, and what will be the limit? Presumably he means at the upper end of the price point there.
So that's interesting, because fundamentally we decide what the amenities that go into the scheme are during the development stage, right? But we do try and get feedback again post occupation. What are the craziest requests? I mean, we're putting in like, I wouldn't call them crazy, but the new wave of stuff that Gen Z people are interested in, right? So it's like, as Brian mentioned, the YouTuber thing on the gym, or the fact that we have a a content creation room, it's called, which is basically a space for vloggers and bloggers to go and film themselves with like really high-tech cameras or you know, 8K content, and all it is really is a meeting room, but it's got all the kit and the lighting. But these are kind of things that have emerged due to the kind of prevalence now of blogging and vlogging and Instagrammers and YouTubers. So, you know, having that in a student accommodation is probably a bit crazy. Yeah, perhaps, but it's not actually a capitally intensive thing. Capital is as a capital cost, it's not that much, and it's really easy to provide. But actually, it speaks to the generation, and it allows them to do some of the stuff that they are getting into. Juice bars and wellness. So, you know, I think the current, again, the Gen Z, there's a lot more interest in just general health food trends, you know, fitness, a lot less drinking. There was a stat that 50% of them don't drink. I don't know, I haven't fact checked it, but I've heard it a lot. So it is possible. I wouldn't be surprised. And so, you know, again, providing juice bars, and then to your earlier point about bringing third-party operators and, you know, partnering up with some people who, to link it back to the environmental thing, use food waste to bring, for example, you know, carrots that look a bit wonky, but then you can use, and supermarkets won't take them. So you take them and then you make carrot juice on site. And then you also say that you're saving carrots from waste. So it's linking it all together so that it's you know, all together, if you look at it and take a step back, it's like, wow, okay, this is a bit crazy, but actually it's nothing, you know, it's not mind-blowing. I don't know if that makes sense. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Tarek. Yeah, that's great.
George, may I just add to that? And I think we've talked a lot about the things that we've added or the things that students want in terms of facilities. But actually, I think for all of those who are owners or operators of these schemes out there, actually, it's the staff that are on the site, on the ground, that actually create the atmosphere and the programs that those facilities are then used for, that actually make the big difference. And certainly during the pandemic experience, we found the uptake of students and staff to programs of, you know, whether it's deliveries, food collection, food delivery, pen pal with you know, elderly residents in the local vicinity, litter picks, very sort of inclusive community stuff that didn't actually rely on an amenity or a facility as such, but it was a program of events and yeah, that really made the difference to students. And I think that is still very you know, very much part of the equation. It's not all about shiny you know, B&O speakers, although I'd love some of those in my house, Brian, but it's what you do with them.
Thanks, Craig. Craig, you mentioned technology earlier, so let's move on to that and talk about how prop tech is powering the sector, and also how far along the technology industry is in being able to integrate all the different systems that you need to run a building. What's your take on that, Craig?
I think we're probably not as far advanced as an industry as we perhaps ought to be or would like to be. I think there are an awful lot of different systems and lots of systems that do incredibly interesting, exciting things, but pulling them all together into one service offering is quite interesting and difficult. I think obviously cost is one issue. We've already mentioned, I think it was Brian mentioned, that in the build to rent sector, you can have all the bells and whistles because the economics of the deal stack up to enable that to happen. I think PBSA, even at the higher end, does have you know, a price point, and we have to be conscious of that. So actually, some of the technology may be too expensive at this moment in time to really you know, put in as a sort of basic offer. I think there are a lot of COVID lessons again to be learned out of technology. And I think it was a real impetus driver for this area. I think the remote processing, I think I mentioned before, of cradle to grave. You know, you start with marketing, you get virtual tours, you have online forms, you have remote check-in and checkouts. I think all those sort of systems weren't necessarily standardized across the sector, and I think people had to make them so to enable students to actually come and first of all, you know, find their accommodation, then check in and then use it. So I think that has hurried the process along towards automation. I think once students are actually resident, I think things such as building maintenance, defects reporting, etc., and again the improvement of use of BMS systems, I think again has assisted this, made the property management side of things much more efficient and saved time and costs. Also probably assisted in such mundane things as protection of data across these many millions of students and information that we hold on them. So I think again that's been a good thing. And then I think from an operator's point of view, from our point of view, again, sort of probably a speeding up of the process to enable us to develop and report much better management information for not just ourselves, but also ultimately owners. Certainly during the pandemic, we saw a large increase in the type of information requested and reporting requirements, and rightly so, as owners sought to understand on a very timely basis what the impact of demand, arrears, etc. was on their business, enabling them to work out quickly what financial flex they may have had available to make refunds, etc. So again, I think the pandemic has speeded that process up. Those products were out there already, but not everyone used them and not consistently. And I think finally we come back again to amenity and well-being, and I think critically that during the pandemic relied on technology. People booking those amenity spaces, people putting on events, food delivery, parcel tracking, parcel delivery, all of those things simply wouldn't have been possible without technology, and yet they were possible 18 months, 2 years ago, and people happily existed on that basis. So I think all those things combined do see us, as an industry as a whole, massively moving quicker towards a sort of more fully automated systems, relying on technology at a baseline level, as well as a sort of more luxurious level.
Thanks, Craig. Brian, I think you mentioned that Roundhill is also an investor in PropTech. So what's your take on the state of play in the PBSA sector regarding technology and where it's heading?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a bit of a danger here that there's a bit of a surge of, and this is not stuff that Roundhill's invested in, but my observation is that there's a bit of a surge of people who are creating product because they can do something and not necessarily really understanding whether they should even bother. So I've got a kind of every day, and I'm sure all of us have a similar problem. You get 2, 3, 4, 5 inbound prop techs. I'm going to change your world with this latest widget, gadget, software piece that I have created. And and it's like, this is great. This is really interesting. You have the technology to do this, but is it really going to make any difference to my life or the life of the investment or the life of the students? And too many times the answer is no. So we're finding that, okay, what's making a difference? And Craig said before, we can do end-to-end bookings and payments. That's great. We've got that technology. We can have slightly improved version of that technology, great. But its margins of error and its fine margins rather, and the cost to change your existing system for a new one is significant. Not just in the like-for-like pound for pound stuff, but retraining all of your staff, reloading up historical data, linking to your existing back of house financial systems and such like. So we see a lot of whizzy, hey, we can do this amazing thing with dynamic pricing, but fundamentally they forget that we, unlike an airline which might have 250 data points every day, we in a 250 bed residence or 500 bed residence would have that many data points in a year. And somebody might build another building next to you, and that'll just blow out your algorithm completely. So there are certain things like this which are can save a little bit of time, but actually you're generally speaking about £150,000 investment to save it £25,000 worth of personnel time to sort that problem out. So I think it's a real mismatch. Or some guys who came out with some great stuff. Like, I can tell you if your student's in your room at any one time, it'll cost £300 per room for a sensor, or plus 100 grand set across, plus 100 grand a year running costs to be able to tell you if your student's in the room. Well, actually the door, if I really want to know that, I can knock on the door, or the door access control device will tell me, or there are any number of ways I can get the same information. But what that cost line does is actively destroys value for investors, for banks, margin, whatever. So what we're finding is this technology that's there because it can be, or that's arriving because it can be, but people aren't checking to see whether they should be bothering. So people in the prop tech industry really need to understand their market in PBSA if they really have this great idea they want to install. And what we are seeing in the other case with some of the PropTech elements is there are such low barriers to entry on lots of these things that as soon as you've had the bright idea and started installing it and you started buying it, there are 10 people lined up behind you offering exactly the same thing. So I think you've got to really create your USP, sell it really hard, and make sure there are very high barriers to the next people coming in order to create that sustainable competitive advantage as a PropTech business. And with that PropTech Ventures Fund, we've been very successful in identifying those ones that have sustainability and that can't be immediately substituted within a few months, because that's the nub of it here. So we love to see more technology. The students love to see more technology. Our buildings are backwards and forwards with technology and are working at a very high level in terms of what we can achieve from a technological perspective. We're at the point now to take the next step. It requires such significant investment that there's got to be a very good reason to do it. And more often than not, we're just not seeing that it's going to make that much of a difference to people's lives at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Tarek, I want to quickly talk about distribution and marketing. So how are operators effectively reaching potential customers? Who is connecting supply and demand? And what, if any, is the role of the education establishments in this?
Yeah, I mean, you still have all the classic kind of agents, especially in the international markets. We still very much rely on agents and websites like student.com and all those stuff, which, you know, has been there. But then, you know, we have been trying to do things directly, reaching the students directly. And, you know, there isn't any one particular way in which we're doing this, but we have got our own in-house team now. So, for example, we're trying to reach, you know, some publications in South Korea because of our partnership with Samsung. So, you know, via the Samsung network, you know, maybe unlocking things there. I happen to speak Arabic as my mother tongue, so we're trying to kind of grow that presence in the Middle East directly. We know that they send people in sponsorship, on scholarships to live and study here. So, you know, trying these things as well. Here in the UK, again, it's the classic stuff. We still do all the Google clicks and SEO stuff. You know, at the end of the day, you can do all the cool marketing, you know, but if you're not going to be in the top few hits on Google, you know, well, that's where people find things. Like, that is literally the place, right? And it's the same if I want to buy whatever, you know, and I try searching for it, I'm not going to go to page 3 of Google. I just won't. So, you know, like, stick to the basics. And beyond that, then it's all the marketing and the positioning and all that. But you need to get those basics right, the fundamental thing of actual presence where it matters. With regards to the universities and the partnerships with them, it's very powerful, and we benefit from it in some of our locations where they refer students to us. You know, it's not a lease or anything like that. It's just more of a referral or a kind of soft nonce, as it's called. But then again, you know, can you rely on that, or do you want to access the students directly? Because I'm not really sure what the university is going to be doing in the next few months. You know, it's been a bit fragmented the way that they're dealing with things. I don't know if you saw, but there was an article with us in it a few weeks ago, urging universities to kind of maybe be a bit more consistent, I suppose, because, you know, we're supposed to be opening up everything in July. We still don't know what's going to happen in September. You know, I don't know what their pressure points are. I can speculate, but I'm not sure. But so it's really good to have these links with the universities, because obviously at the end of the day, they are the provider of this demand. Without them, there are no students, and therefore there is no need for student accommodation. But, you know, you can't just be fully reliant on that. I think you need to have your own kind of wider network, which includes the universities, the agents, the direct stuff, you know, the basics, as I said, the Google stuff, the cool stuff, and all of it together hopefully will stand you in good stead. You know, what could happen is you might focus too much on one thing, and then, you know, in a market that's going to become more competitive and where, you know, only the best will win, but the mediocre will probably not be winning as much as in the last 3 years, where market forces were carrying them. You need to make sure everything's covered. So you need all of that.
Yeah, thank you, Tarek. Rebecca, let's talk about the role of PBSA in mixed-use developments and alongside other asset classes. We're used to seeing on-campus properties, but we are now seeing more town centre and city centre PBSA developments. Are you seeing an increase in PBSA assets in mixed-use schemes, multi-use schemes?
In some places, it is emerging. I think it's a really interesting one because I think we've touched on, students are getting really used to this like quality living in PBSA with these, luxuries and amenities, and when they start working, they want the same quality. So there's like potentially quite an interesting opportunity for operators to look at how they kind of keep those students as they move into the workforce and moving them into some sort of co-living environment. And then on that point, there is quite a lot of older PBSA stock in some university towns and cities now, in fairly good locations, and it's whether there's an asset management opportunity there to kind of perhaps change it and flex it to fit into the co-living model, and whether the operators could kind of change their model to adjust for that. So we are beginning to see the mixed use opportunity, but I think that there's probably more to come, and perhaps it will be one of the things that emerges post-pandemic.
Thanks, Rebecca. Brian, are you incorporating different tenures in some of your developments, and does students sit alongside, for example, co-living or build to rent?
Yes, so again, it moves around jurisdiction by jurisdiction. I think we are seeing a little bit of a trend towards planners preferring mixed-use schemes. So we just did a large mixed-use scheme in Utrecht in the Netherlands, and that was pretty much a third residential for rent, apartments for rent to people who weren't students, and 2/3 student, and that was very popular. And I don't think those blocks particularly interacted with one another, but they were certainly on the same site. And we recently acquired a portfolio of assets in Germany, which required a significant amount of capital investment, and some of those assets were originally developed in the 70s and 80s, and even beforehand. And in there we have, I think our oldest tenant is 96 years old, and there are definitely residents, in some cases pepper potted amongst students, which wouldn't necessarily have been our default setting. It's something we more inherited than designed. However, it seems to work perfectly well. And so I think we will see more of that. We have a large scheme in Portugal as well, which again will be mixed use residential and student, also some offices and some F&B offerings, a sort of a very, very large mixed use site. So definitely, I think I would, if you asked me 8 years ago, I would have been allergic to the concept. I'm definitely no longer allergic to the concept. I'm actually seeing it working in places. I see more, it used to be a problem for neighbours and students, perhaps with perceived antisocial behaviour. People were concerned about students being on their doorstep, and us as the student operators were concerned about people accessing the student residence, and perhaps where we had that 18, 19-year-old grouping, we wanted to more protect them maybe than we in the past than has proven necessary to do in the long term. So we're seeing, I think, more porosity of sites. And if you look at the student hotels, for example, we'll have mixed tenures hotels in with students, not quite pepper potted, but in the same building, sharing receptions and other things. And if you ask those guys, they will tell you that it works really well. So I think it's not a hard no, like it might have been in the past for me. It's more of a, oh, well, let's look at the project on its own merits and see what kind of tenures we think can be mixed inside the overall project.
Great.
That way.
Thank you, Brian. We are running out of time, sadly, but there's another question for you there, Brian, from Vincent. What we're going to do at the end of the session is leave the chat open for a couple of minutes after we finish. Vincent, could you type your, actually, I can probably copy and paste that into the chat so you can see that, Brian, and perhaps the two of you can.
I can see the chat. So I mean, we have.
There you go. It's just gone in there. So thanks everyone. That hour has flown past. That was a great discussion. just got a couple of bits to show before we finish. As we mentioned earlier, this session, which started in this series, which started in January, has been sponsored by Res Harmonics, and we've just got a very short video to show to sum up what we've done in the last 6 months.
You actually want to create spaces where people can live, work and play.
They're going to have the ability to spend. It's just giving them, the right option, the right choice to spend it on.
There are some good things happening, but there's lots more to do within the industry to really make deep change.
So I think you'll see a sort of hotelization, not just of the product, but also of actually the operating strategy, if you like, for landlords.
In our experience, there's always a tipping point, but if 10 to 16% of the market do something, it becomes the thing, and then all of a sudden everybody starts doing it.
So thanks again to Res for sponsoring the series. We've really enjoyed doing it. I've learned a lot. We've grown our audience. It's been a lot of fun. And we have got one bonus for you to tack on to the end, which is a very timely one, which is taking place on July the 14th. And it's about the moratorium extension and what it means for landlords and tenants. So the link to register for that one is now in the chat. So these webinars have been a precursor to a fantastic new event that we're launching in London on October the 26th and 27th. It's called the Urban Living Festival, and it's focusing on how various hospitality and real estate asset classes are starting to converge and overlap, something which we've actually touched on in this session. We can't wait to start putting on big scale live events again, and we'd love to see loads of you there. We've got a terrific lineup of sponsors and media partners for the session. And if you'd like to know more about it, please contact my colleague Katie, whose details are there. Do give us a follow on the social channels. We're across all of them. We're quite active on there, so it would be good to see you there. The chat will be open for the next couple of minutes. If there's quite a lot of information in there, so if you need any time to catch up with anything there, then please do. But I'd just like to say thanks ever so much to Brian, to Rebecca, to Craig and to Tarek for their fantastic contributions today. Thanks to CommScope for sponsoring the session. Thanks to Res for sponsoring the series, and hope to see you all again soon. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks very much.